at COP28. And to kick off, I'd like to invite Minister for Climate Change and Energy, the Honourable Chris Bowen, to the stage for some brief introductory remarks.
Well, thank you, Julia, and of course we are not here on traditional lands, but I do pay my respects to elders of Australia's First Nations people who are present wherever they are, and thank them for their stewardship of our lands over the millennia. Well, it's a very important day here at COP, and COP, as you know, has many different faces. There's the public-facing interactions, which we're engaging here today on Youth Day, and there's intense negotiations elsewhere going on, which I'm pretty thickly involved in behind the scenes. But this is an important part of a COP, and I don't get time to do many of these public-facing events when a COP is on, but I did want to do this one because this is ultimately what it's all about. And some people, for reasons I understand, have a degree of cynicism about COPs and international engagement these days. Can they do the job? Can we get the job done? I'm a little bit more optimistic because otherwise why are we here? Why would we even bother? And COPs have made a difference when you think about the big breakthrough in Paris and what that's meant. That has actually changed behaviour, it's changed policies, it's changed the level of emissions, as did Glasgow. Actually changed behaviour, changed policy, drive emissions, and that's it, drive emissions down, and that's what we're certainly working on here today, and I have a degree of quiet confidence that we'll have a good breakthrough and a good step forward over the course of this week in terms of the COP outcomes, and that will be important. It will mean that 1.5 is more realistic than it otherwise was going into this week, which is so important for reasons we all understand and appreciate very well. The difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees of warming for future generations is just enormous, just enormous. Every little nth of a degree over 1.5 makes a huge difference to the health of our planet and the health of the population in generations to come. So this youth dialogue is an important part. I want to thank the participants. We have our Youth Advisory Committee leading into COP, which I've met with, and Sally Box, our lead negotiator, has met with in the lead up to COP. That's important. Your involvement here today is important. Thank you for making your way to Dubai to be part of our Australian COP delegation. I'm looking forward to listening to part of the conversation. As I said, I don't get to many of these public-facing events, but this is one I did want to get to because I do regard it as vitally important going forward. So thank you, and good luck in the presentation.
Thank you very much, Minister. I'm just going to introduce our panel members here today. We've got, maybe you could just put your hand up as I say your name. We've got Bodhi, who is a member of our Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change, and they advise the Department on our engagement at COP28. So welcome, Bodhi. We've got Amelia Turk, who is an active member of Youngo and has been facilitating the youth climate forums at COP, including speaking at the Dubai Youth Climate Dialogue earlier today, I understand. Yeah. We have Angelica Mantikas. Did I say that right? Yeah. And she's from the Australian Youth for Climate Engagement, which is an NGO working to build youth capacity in the international climate space. We also have Elly, Hanrahan, who's leading a delegation of scholars to COP28 this year as part of Global Voices, which I think a lot of people are aware is a youth-led organisation that was created to give young Australians a voice in decision-making. And finally, we have a visitor, an international guest from Canada. Kristin McCory is the co-chair of the Canadian Government's Environment and Climate Change Youth Council. So a very warm welcome to each of our delegates. I'm just going to sit back down and we have a series of questions to ask the members who may have some advice that they'd like to share with both the Minister and some thoughts that they'd like to share with all of you while we're here today. Hello? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, our first question is, what's one thing you'd like to say to ministers and leaders here at COP on youth participation and engagement in this process? Is there someone who would like to lead off?
I could take that first. I don't think it's anything surprising. Like it's not mind blowing or anything that hasn't been said before. But young people are best placed to be helping devise the policies that are going to shape our future. We're going to live until the beginning of the next century. We are the people who will be paying the consequences of the decisions made today, and that's something that is really serious, and something that I think all of us collectively we're so passionate about. And we've been putting our hands up and our voices up for so long, and I mean it's great that we're all here today at the COP. And I think we need to make sure that our voices are taken seriously, and our ideas are taken forward as well.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to that. As young people, we have a really unique privilege, and that is we don't have decades of being, involved in a system of institutions where, we've come to think that our systems are normal and this is how they should be. We have a unique privilege of, dealing with a big crisis like the climate crisis, but also we're coming from a perspective that's new, that's fresh. And so our ideas they may be a bit controversial and they may not fit in with our current systems and structures, but there's a real benefit to that because, as we know, the climate crisis cannot be solved using our current systems and structures. So it's really incredibly crucial to engage with young people on these matters. We may not have PhDs or 50 years of experience, but I really think that is where our benefit lies as young people. And probably on top of that, I'd like to say that I think there's a real opportunity to engage more with our Indigenous youth, with Pacific youth, especially in the lead up to COP31. Something that we can definitely do better as even young people in Australia is engaging more regionally, and it'd be great to have the government facilitate and support that as well.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, 40% of the world's population classifies youth by UN standards. But here, we only about 12% of people here at COP28 are under the age of 35, right? But when people are voting, when people are deciding, who should be the next leader, you still have 40% of the population, around 40%, that want to, have an input and are able to be involved in the discussions. So I think it's really important that you're considering not only, who's here at COP, but more broadly, look at how many people you're able to influence and look at how many people's voices you have to encompass when you're making decisions.
Yeah, I think I've been super impressed this COP at the institutionalisation of young people's voices, especially through the Youth Climate Champion and in collaboration with Youngo. I think on that level, internationally, it's been quite impressive to see. Domestically, it needs to happen a lot more. I'm a little disappointed there is no youth advisory group on climate change in Australia next year. I think that is something that really should be reconsidered because we're not solving climate change at this COP. It's going to be around next year. It's going to be around for a long time. So I think that would be a key takeaway from me, is especially seeing it here, it is existential and it will influence all of us, and so therefore we should be having a voice that is institutionalised.
I would echo what all of my colleagues have said, but especially Angelica. I think that on that note, youth are really unafraid to name the systemic roots of the crisis that we're in, the socioeconomic system, and the way that is, inextricably connected through the extractive economy, through the profit motive, through colonialism. I think that youth are really unafraid to mention these things, but it feels as though in mainstream discourse it's not really talked about. And I think that there's a responsibility to name the actual causes of the climate crisis, and as we said, to innovate new systems that actually allow us to solve the crisis and move forward into a better world. And I think that there's often, Noam Chomsky, when he writes about the Vietnam War, writes about how there's this idea of what is radical discourse, and that what is radical is sort of beyond the mainstream, and it's idealistic and unreachable, and it sort of silos certain perspectives into hopeless idealism. And I think oftentimes youth are written off as radical, as opposed to really pragmatic and grounded in reality and grounded in very true and real hegemonic systems that influence us everywhere. And so I think that we have a responsibility to push that agenda forward and to actually name those things.
Thank you all. That's really very thoughtful comments, and it does make me, there's a couple of themes that kind of came up there that I'd like to pursue a little bit more. One was the institutionalisation of a voice in domestic and I understand in Canada that you have a standing, I'm just going to make sure I get it right, the Canadian government's Environment and Climate Change Youth Council. And I know this year we have, in Australia, for the first time, had a youth advisory group on engagement at COP28. So I'm just wondering if, Kristin, maybe you can share something, your experience on Canada's council, and others on the panel could maybe provide some advice both from the Youth Council and how you think that might work in Australia.
Sure. So in Canada, we have a slightly different system. The Youth Council is embedded within the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. So we're technically Minister Guilbeault's Youth Council, and then embedded within the ministry. So we're particularly there to speak on climate change. I'm under the impression in Australia you guys rotate around and have different priorities. And I think that embedding us within the ministry has been incredibly beneficial for ensuring that our perspectives are heard, but also ensuring that there's consistency year to year. This is the first year we've been revived since the 90s, so I think that there's hiccups along the way that all of us are excited to work through, but I think having that consistency is absolutely critical, and it seems as though in Canada, I think the ministry has done a really great job of taking us seriously and hearing us out. Whether or not that always translates to meaningful engagement is another question, but yeah, it's a system that seems to work quite well so far.
Yeah, I would just like to add to that. I think similarly, the department has been really great at listening as best they can as well. And I think that's all we can ask for as youth as well, is to be listened to. I think we certainly need to push for action, and activism can be a really important part of what we do. But those formal communication methods are also equally as important. And I think that is something that has worked really well for the Youth Advisory Group here, is that we've had really responsive people that have worked with us, and that has made us feel quite valued.
If I can just add something from somebody who wasn't on the Youth Advisory Group, but just kind of, working more generally with young Australians, there's often a lack of education around what the Youth Advisory Group does or whether it even exists. And I think it's one of the really important things is about making it known, making it seem like, okay, you're on the Youth Advisory Group and I report to these people and I'm listening to these people, and it's an open communication. I think while it was a really, really great initiative to set up the Youth Advisory Groups, and all the topics, it's really important to make sure that they actually feed to some community inputs, especially when we're leading up to COP31, bidding for COP31. It's really important that we're making sure that all people in the Pacific and in Australia are consulted in the process, and having a Youth Advisory Group is a really great opportunity to begin that process, but it's about making sure that it continues throughout the years in a way which is actually including everyone.
Just leading on from institutionalising partnerships with young people, if I can do a cheeky spruik for Global Voices, we've been bringing youth contingents to the COP since 2011. And, we, as part of that, we have a policy fellowship program. So we've had young people come to these COPs and then publish policy proposals on our website for, over a decade now. And you can see that, those ideas, they were so far ahead of their time. We have a policy that was published on a loss and damage fund in 2012, which, and now that's sort of something that's part of the normal discourse. But I think as, someone in government, you can look at these policies or these voices in whatever form, institutionalise and formalise those partnerships, because really it's a look to see where our future leaders will take our country and our policies. And I think it's, if it's about votes, that's where our 40% of the votes are going to be going.
Yeah, I'd just like to agree and echo kind of everything that's been said, but also remembering that as young people, we don't get paid for this. In the lead up to COP, I've been working 40-hour work weeks trying to organise delegations and fund delegates. So I think part of this institutionalisation, as young people, we're often expected to work for free constantly, to save our own future. I don't want to be here, right? I don't want to be at a COP. I want to be, with my family. I want to be back home. I want to be in my village in Greece. The thing is that to be here takes a lot of emotional labour, physical labour, and a lot of work that most young people in this room don't get compensated for. Actually, interesting thing quickly. Put your hand up if you have not been paid to come to this COP as a young person. Like, we don't get paid. We're here because we need to save our futures. So I think really recognising that and, being able to provide some sort of compensation or just recognising that we're here for a need, not any financial reason, is really important as well.
Oh, just really quickly on that, other countries do fund and pay young people to be here. We have national youth delegates. In the Glasgow and in the Sharm el-Sheikh implementation plan, it called for governments to have national youth delegates as part of the party negotiations who are paid, right? So it's not like this is a new idea. This is an idea which has been around for decades. It's just about implementing it.
If I can just jump onto that, Canada also does not pay their youth council, so if you all want to pressure the Canadian Pavilion, please feel free. 2 weeks of lost wages is a lot, especially in a cost of living crisis. I will say too quickly, I see that the minister's dipped out, I think, but two other differences, I think, between our council and the Australian council, where we might have some knowledge transfer, is that in being the minister's youth council, the minister has been incredibly not only receptive, but engaged in talking to us. The other day I was standing talking to just some random people, and I felt a tap on my back, and I turned around, and it was Minister Guilbeault, and he said, "How's your day been? What have you learned? What are your takeaways?" Right? And I think that's a really admirable position of leadership, to say that leadership is about democracy, and it's about engaging with the people that you're around. I think that's really critical, and again, I think departmental support is a huge part of that. I will say too, on the note of engaging Australian Pacific Islanders and people everywhere. One of the issues I think our council has had is that we weren't entirely sure at the beginning if we were consultative, representative, or sort of action and advocacy based, which are all very different things. So I think that we've mostly done consultation on departmental policy as it's come out, but I've heard that you guys have been assigned a list of tasks, and I'm not sure what Youngo does, but these are very different things. If you want a representative youth council that is regularly speaking to the population, that requires a lot more effort and work than sort of bringing your own professional skill set and speaking as yourself. So I think narrowing in on what the intention is with youth is also really important for meaningful engagement.
Thank you. I think then kind of taking your thoughts on how we can do it better domestically, I'd be really keen to hear from all of you, is this your first COP? Have you been to more than one COP? And what advice would you give to youth delegates about how to engage in the process, but also what advice would you give to party delegations about how to engage the youth while they're here?
Yeah, so this is my first COP. I've helped with the online behind-the-scenes stuff for the past few COPs, but this is my first COP just because of funding issues and everything like that. My one piece of advice would to everyone, and don't take advice from me because I'm doing too much, but make sure you plan yourself out to the day. Look at the agenda before the day of the the day that you come onto. And if you are speaking at things, make sure obviously COP28 is a massive venue, but just in general, make sure you're not over committing yourself to everything, especially because you'll find so many impromptu things like, you might get a message being like, oh, you should come here because this person's here, right? You want to be able to, you don't want to be like, oh, sorry, I'm in a panel, so I missed this really important, opportunity. So it's really about making sure that you're able to find enough space to eat food, to just, do impromptu things, and also to sleep well. So plan out your day.
Yeah, and just to add from maybe a bit of a different perspective. So this is my second COP. I was at COP 27 last year in Sharm el-Sheikh. And something that I really learnt, and it's a big difference I've noticed this COP, is that this year I've actively sought out to engage, and I prepared very well in advance with youth, with Australian youth. Some of you have been in, we've been in Zoom calls together over the past few months. But I would say, really, take this opportunity. We are all together in the same room, the same place. Australia is a big country, guys. It's a big island. There may not be another opportunity for us, throughout the year to actually meet with, hug each other, engage, have conversations, become friends. And so I would say really make the most of that. And outside of Australia, go to the Moana Pavilion, meet with the Pacific youth, we're talking about Pacific, building those partnerships, genuinely build them, make friends with them as well. And then, extend even further. Go make friends, with the Latinos, with the Africans. Go out and make those and build those connections. And I think this COP, we've definitely seen that that's changed with the support that we've gotten, from the government to bring funded delegates here. So, everyone's making comments of, oh, the Australians again, the Australians are everywhere. Last year at COP, all the young people, I haven't seen any Aussies. You're the first Australian young person or Australian that I've met. So there's been a massive change in the perception of Australia and how we deal in this international space.
My first COP was the COP21, actually. So when the Paris Agreement was signed, I was a bit of an odd 21-year-old. I saved up my cheesecake shop money and I flew myself over to Paris. And we were not even allowed inside the conference centre. They put all the young people out into this cold warehouse, and we, fought from the outside to have 1.5 degrees written into the text, which is something they did not want to do. So, I was at the COP last year, and I'm here again, and I'm just always reminded that we are really standing on the shoulders of giants. There have been so many young people who have come here before us, and I'm always so inspired because it has been a really long, hard uphill battle, and we still have a long way to go. But the fact that we're on a panel today is just. I can't believe how far we've come, and we have a long way to go, but I really think we're going to get there. I'm feeling really inspired in this today.
This is my first climate change COP. I was at the Biodiversity COP 15 in Montreal last year. I think that youth and people supporting youth have a similar responsibility in that as youth, I think we have a responsibility to figure out the levers and mechanisms behind the ideas that we want to see. What is preventing them from being institutionalized, operationalized? Who do you need to talk to? What countries need to agree? Where does it need to be embedded? Is that something that can happen here at negotiations? Does it happen elsewhere? Figuring out how to actually move and push the needle. And I think that for folks supporting youth, for people in government especially, for youth councils and whatnot, remembering that because this isn't our full-time job, oftentimes because government is so opaque and siloed, it's very difficult to come in from the outside and to immediately know how to push the needle, right? We might have great ideas, and I think part of why youth are written off as sort of just throwing radical ideas at the wall and screaming loud and hoping someone will hear, is because we're often not told and trained in the specific trade-offs of policy. And so I think there's a dual responsibility there, where as youth we really do have to seek out, again, how do things actually get operationalized? And then the supporting piece of that, again, is just policy is always about trade-offs, right? And without knowledge of how to do that, I think youth are often really, really disempowered. Yeah, I'll leave it there for now.
Yeah, I would actually really agree with that. It's my first COP too, and it might be a little bit controversial, but I would really have to strongly consider coming back again. I'm really not sure if I've been a bit disillusioned with the whole process, and I'm not really sure if this is the best place that youth can really, like you were saying, push the needle, really influence that policy. Because at the moment in the structures that we're in, we aren't still really being listened to. Maybe because of our naivety, or we don't know how those levers work. But I would really have to strongly consider coming back again, because I think activism plays a really big role, and it's a balance of that in these communication methods that are formalised in government, and then having that people power behind you, like Elly was saying before, having a bit of a movement, even to outside a COP or something like that, I think can be equally as powerful as being in the blue zone, for example.
I think on that note too, there's a question around who's actually creating strategic policy, right? We know that community-based or community-led research and true community engagement happens at every step of the process, right? It happens before, during, and after, and it's an active co-collaboration rather than just being brought in at the end and saying, hey, here's our priorities, what do you think? As if at that point they're malleable. And so there's questions around have you met with your negotiators? Have you met with the minister? Have you met with anyone to talk about here's what the sort of strategic plan and vision is? what needs to move, what needs to shift, that's possible and that's not, right? I think that so often youth are left out as stakeholders, and we're not looped in at the beginning, and so there's no active collaboration happening. There's rather just sort of pulling youth in at the end and saying, what do you think? Things might not change now, but what do you think now? And I think that's really an issue.
Yeah, and just to add to that, a lot of the language and the systems here are incredibly inaccessible to young people. Like what I was saying before, we don't have 50 years of experience being in this space, coming to a million different COPs. Like, it's really crucial that there is accurate and enough capacity building for young people to engage in the space, because there is room for scope and for changing things, but it's about, learning the acronyms, figuring out the informals. Like, it's a lot of it is really in understanding how these processes work, which I think is a main barrier, not just for young people, but also for communities engaging in these spaces. We shouldn't have to translate how we speak and how we share our stories, but there is some mechanism of translation that needs to happen between the realities on the ground, youth perspectives, frontline realities, and these, spaces talking about, MWPs and GSTs and informal this. Like, we really need to build the capacity of young people and of communities to engage in these spaces and open up these spaces to them and make them less wordy.
And just really quickly building off what Angelica was saying, I think there's also, I said it before, but there's a divide between Australian youth and other youth. And part of that is to do with the acronyms. Global North, if you ask any single person in the whole of Australia, are we in Global North or Global South? Every single person will say Global South. I guarantee you. I have not met a single Australian who has said, oh, we're in Global North? Yeah, I knew that. Everyone's like, oh, wow. So that's kind of like a divide where everybody from the Global South regards us as young Australians and Australians in general as being from the Global North, but nobody in Australia knows that we are in Global North. So I think that kind of creates this further thing of confusion around. Exactly, it's a privileged position which we are not, we're not aware that we are part of Global North, right? So as Australian youth, we come here expecting to be a part of the Southern Hemisphere, but instead we are regarded as being part of the Northern, the Global North, which just creates further disillusions in regards to our privilege, in regards to where we can speak, in regards to funding. All the funding goes to Global South because Global South countries and Global South youth, unfortunately, face all these barriers, which we think we face as well, but then we realise, oh wait, we actually don't. We are so privileged that we are able to be here, that we are able to, spend 2 weeks away from work without being paid. We're all here voluntary. So I think that's a big change as well, making sure that young Australians and Australians in general are able to know how we fit into the rest of the world in a geopolitical sense when it comes to UN and especially the UNFCCC.
Thank you. Well, I would say it's a very impressive amount of insight and wisdom here, and I hope that you continue to engage in COP because we do need you. It's a crazy process, and it's inaccessible, I think, to many of us, even who come with the benefit of government resources and experience, and it's a very difficult process to engage in, but engaging in it and seeking to understand at what points you can be heard, at what points you can have influence, and and the fact that you already are aware that is work that includes the lead up, the process, the time afterwards. I think, yeah. And then the actual one thing that listening to you speak and thinking about my own experience, I think that coordination with other countries and amongst yourselves is so important, because it's the way that you can access this process is as others say to you, hey, there's this thing and this is how this works, and then sharing that with each other and with your networks. And the other thing I would say is that the relationships that you build here amongst all of you, if you think about that in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, if you think about where you're all going to be throughout the globe, that's a really powerful thing. So,
yeah, just to add, because I 100% agree with everything that you're saying, advocacy, activism, the climate crisis doesn't start and end at COP. You know, these connections don't start and end at COP. Us, you know, pushing the government and working on this doesn't start and end within these 2 weeks. You know, we're going to go home, we're all probably going to sleep for a month, and then we're going to start working again. So it's really important to, you know, have this experience and engage in this space, but take your learnings back and let's continue working together. And in doing that, I'd like to spruik an event in the Monash Pavilion at 3 p.m. today, which is on uniting the Australian Oceania Youth Climate Movement. Like, let's get our stuff together and figure out what we're doing. You know, like, we're not united. We've all got great ideas and we're doing great things within our own organisations, but let's come together and let's let this be the start of hopefully a really united and forceful movement too.
I think just before we wrap up, noting that we're kind of getting close to the end of time, I just wondered if there are any comments or questions from the audience. I can see a bunch of...
Hi everyone, my name is Kupakwashe Matangira, or Kupa for short, and I'm also with the Australian Youth for International Climate Engagement, and I am a young person. Something that I've been seeing here at this COP is that young people are definitely being seen. Physically, we are here and we are present, but I feel like we're not really being heard. We're not at that negotiating table. We're not writing text to go into draft resolutions. And I was wondering what all of you amazing panelists think is that next step for us in terms of the international climate movement to actually have like a form of mechanized power and for our voices to be heard and to carry weight in the same way as high-level delegations do. Thank you.
Take this all with a grain of salt, but we've been scheming some things over the last few days. One of our deputy ministers in Canada, what he thought might be the most meaningful way for youth to engage in things like COP is to unite together, to meet as many other youth as possible. I know that the Canadian Youth Council is scheming about trying to pull together a group chat of international youth, maybe 1 or 2 people from every major youth organization, whether youth councils or not, who can then go back to their respective groups. But we can all strategically push forward 1 to 3 items at every COP and have a cohesive strategy as youth. That we can then, I think the second part of that is then finding your negotiators, lurking, bullying them, and asking them if they have a chance to speak with you. Again, pushing for it institutionally, asking what the department and the ministry, whether or not you're able to speak with the negotiators beforehand, finding the minister, and it's just like, again, finding the gaps and where you're able to fill them and where you're able to influence, which unfortunately I don't think is every space, but it definitely won't be if we don't demand it. So I think part of it is our strategy, and the second piece of it is finding where we will be received and just like pummeling through.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I also completely agree with Cooper's question. I will just say we as Youngo is the official youth constituency of the UNFCCC, we have been at every single COP. And since COP1, there have been major developments in the amount of youth inclusion. We have been in negotiation rooms since COP8. While, yes, I completely agree, more needs to be done in terms of strategic alignment, there has been change, and we do each year, we create the Global Youth Statement, which is this year 775,000 inputs from young people around the world, put into a policy document, and that has been delivered to every single party, every single presidency person, everyone, right? So we are slowly making that change, and I guess it comes back to making sure everyone is aware of that and making sure that we can use those effectively. We are creating position papers on a daily basis on all sorts of topics, including, the institutionalisation of the YCC on pretty much everything. And we are able to use those position papers to try and affect negotiations. Last year, we had children and youth mentioned numerous times in the Sharm el-Sheikh implementation plan. If you go back 5 years, there was no mention of children and youth or intergenerational equity. So it's just a part of making those small wins known to kind of continue to push people to, keep fighting for it.
Yeah, I think for me it comes down to 2 things. Firstly, an activism component or a grassroots level movement. I think that has always been super powerful, and that was one of our recommendations this year in our meaningful engagement report to the department, was about removing barriers for young people to get engaged with activism and making sure it is well known. On the other side of that, I think climate education and that civic understanding is key. We can't push for this alignment or strategic embedding into these organisations without a widespread understanding of what they are and what they're hoping to achieve. So on that note, we wrote directly to the Minister about that young Australians must be equipped with a thorough understanding of the world around them and these COP processes, the UNFCCC, exactly like Angelica was saying before, the acronyms. It's something that a lot of people won't think about on a daily basis, but as we were saying before, a COP is not going to be solved at this COP. We're going to have them for a long time into the future. So that wide-ranging civic understanding is crucial.
I don't really have much to add apart from, the decision-making process for the COP happens a long time before the COP, and I think we have to be in the room before COP. The decisions have already been made, the positions have already been decided on. And yeah, exactly what you were saying, institutionalizing those processes, making sure that young people are in the room when those positions are being decided upon. And I love the idea of networking with other, international youth. We're all pushing for the same thing in the lead up to COP. It starts when we get back. January, February, we'll start being people in DQ will start putting together their position papers for the following COP. So that's really where the action has to happen, and it is hard because none of us are paid, and we all have real jobs and real lives outside of
capacity,
this.
yeah.
The capacity is crazy, and I really do hope that there is more appetite in the Australian government to formalise those partnerships, institutionalise them, and make them, just a norm going forward every single year. This is what we do. This is our meetings with the young people and these stakeholders. They have those meetings with other stakeholders all throughout the year. Why are we left off the list?
All right, thank you. I think we're out of time. But yeah, thank you, all of you, very much for your participation and really thoughtful input. I know that we have members of our team who look after our Youth Advisory Council and our youth engagement who are listening very closely to what you're saying. So we do appreciate it. And Minister Bowen had to go off to another engagement, but we will report back to him on the end of the session that he didn't hear. So yeah, so thank you very much. Really do appreciate it. Hope to see you a little bit more before the end of COP.
Thanks for having us.